Cash Only. The Secret Life of a Midnight Omega Comedic Omegaverse BL Novel Chapter 1. The rent is due, and so is my dignity. Han Jae-woo had precisely 14,001. A bag of instant ramen with a suspicious dent in the packaging, and a landlord who texted in all caps. Landlord, 11:58 p.m. Rent was due 3 days ago. Jae-woo, I am not your father. I will not wait forever. You're right, Jae-woo muttered, thumb hovering over the keyboard. You're not my father. My father, unlike you, has never once threatened to change my locks over 400,001. He didn't send that. He sent a crying emoji and a promise that felt, even to him, deeply unconvincing. Being an Omega in Seoul's most competitive university was already a special kind of financial violence. Heat suppressants weren't cheap. Scent blockers were a scam dressed up as skincare. And the campus counselor kept gently suggesting he apply for the Omega Hardship Scholarship, which required him to write an essay about his feelings, which he would rather set himself on fire than do. I could sell a kidney, he said to his ceiling. You could get a job, said Mina, appearing in his doorway with an energy drink and the specific judgmental posture of a best friend who had heard this exact monologue every semester since freshman year. I have a job. I sell my dignity in small installments to Professor Yoon every time I ask for an extension. A real job. Extremely rude of you to suggest I'm not already suffering enough. Jae-woo flopped backward onto his bed, limbs sprawling with the theatrical despair of someone who had, in fact, applied to 11 part-time jobs that week and been rejected by all 11, mostly because Omegas without a chaperone alpha reference letter were apparently a liability for handling customers. He had opinions about that policy, loud ones, which was possibly why none of the interviews had gone well. That was when Mina's phone buzzed with a very specific kind of text from her cousin, who worked the door at a club called Eclipse. Mina said, What? They're hiring a pole dancer. Jae-woo sat up so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. I'm listening. It pays obscenely well, cash nightly, no questions. But you'd have to wear a mask. Apparently it's the whole gimmick, some kind of masked dancer theme night. Nobody knows who you are, very mysterious, very dramatic. Mina squinted at her phone. Also, she says, and I quote, Omegas only, they tip like it's a competitive sport. Jae-woo, who had never touched a pole in his life, but who had spent 4 years doing competitive traditional dance in middle school, and an unreasonable number of hours in his room practicing choreography from music shows he would deny under oath, felt something in his chest go very quiet and very calculating. Say more? Jae-woo? Mina. I have 400,001 of rent, a heat-suppressant prescription that costs more than my tuition, and a deep, burning desire to never again write an essay about my feelings for a scholarship committee. Say more. Mina looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at a friend about to do something legendary and slightly unhinged. You're going to be so good at this, she said, and I'm so scared. Chapter 2. The audition from Hell Eclipse, it turned out, did not look like a den of sin from the outside. It looked like a very nice, very expensive building with a doorman who eyed Jae-woo's college backpack with visible confusion before letting him in. The manager, a beta woman named Director O with the energy of someone who had seen every possible human folly and remained entirely unbothered, looked him up and down once. Omega, yes, danced before? Extensively, Jae-woo said, which was a lie constructed entirely out of confidence and desperation. Show me. There was a pole, there was music. There was, Jae-woo would later reflect, absolutely no reason his body should have known what to do with either of those things, and yet something clicked. Maybe it was the 400,001 breathing down his neck. Maybe it was pure spite toward every job that had rejected him for not having an alpha's permission slip. Maybe he was simply, secretly built for main character energy, and this was just the universe's very strange way of delivering it. He climbed, he spun. He did something with his hips that made Director O's eyebrows climb toward her hairline, and when he landed, a little unsteady, breathing hard, silver-dyed hair falling into his eyes, she was smiling like she'd just found money on the sidewalk. You start tonight, she said. Midnight slot. You'll wear the mask, you keep the mask on no matter what, you tell no one your real name, and you, she pointed at him, do not, under any circumstances, remove it for a tip. I don't care how much they offer. Are we clear? Crystal, Jae-woo said, already mentally calculating rent, suppressants, and a truly frivolous jacket he'd been eyeing for 3 months. What's your stage name? Jae-woo thought about the mask sitting on the counter, sleek, black, with delicate fox-like lines swept up at the temples. Fox, he said. Director O nodded. entirely unimpressed, and walked away to yell at someone about the liquor delivery. Jai-woo stood alone in the dim backstage light, holding a mask that was about to become the most expensive disguise of his life, and felt, for the first time in weeks, something that was suspiciously close to hope. This is fine, he thought. This is a completely normal, sustainable life decision. He was extremely wrong, but he wouldn't find out how wrong for several more chapters. Chapter 3. Enter two idiots with too much money. Kang Tae-min did not go to clubs. Kang Tae-min, in fact, actively avoided anywhere with lighting dim enough to hide a spreadsheet error, which was why it took Seo Ji-hoon exactly 4 attempts, 1 guilt trip, and a threat to tell the shareholders Tae-min doesn't know how to have fun before he agreed to set foot in Eclipse. I have fun, Tae-min said, scanning the club with the expression of a man auditing a crime scene. I had fun on Tuesday. I read a market analysis I disagreed with and then wrote a very satisfying rebuttal. That, Ji-hoon said, sliding into the private booth like he owned the place, which, to be fair, his family's holding company technically had a small stake in, is not what fun means. Drink your very expensive whiskey and watch the show, you emotionally constipated man. I'm not emotionally constip. The lights dropped, the music changed, and a masked figure in black, silver hair, catching the single spotlight like something out of a very tasteful fever dream, climbed the center pole with a fluidity that made the entire private booth go dead silent. Tae-min forgot briefly what a spreadsheet was. Oh, Ji-hoon said, sitting up very straight, whiskey completely forgot. Oh, hello. The dancer, Fox, according to the small placard near the stage, moved like he was daring gravity to try something. Elegant, sharp, deliberately teasing, tossing a glance out toward the crowd that was somehow both bored and devastating at once. Like he knew exactly how much money was about to be thrown at his feet, and found the whole thing mildly funny. I would like to formally revise my earlier statement, Tae-min said very quietly to no one. I do not have Tuesday spreadsheet fun, I have this kind of fun, apparently. You're staring. You're staring harder. I never claimed otherwise, Ji-hoon said, already pulling out his wallet with the single-minded focus of a man who had found his new hobby. Waiter, a tip for the masked gentleman if you'd be so. I was going to tip him first, Tae-min said, in the exact tone he used to announce hostile takeovers. Ji-hoon turned to look at him, delighted. Kang Tae-min, are you competing with me? Over a dancer? I am simply, Tae-min said, jaw tight, already gesturing for a waiter of his own, supporting the local arts. On stage, Fox, who could absolutely hear none of this, but who could see two extremely well-dressed alphas suddenly throwing money at the stage like it had personally insulted their family honor, allowed himself one small, private thought. Rent is paid. He had no idea, spinning gracefully around a pole in a room full of strangers, that he had just accidentally started a war. Chapter 4. A very bad tip by the end of the night. Jai-woo's mask had slipped exactly twice. Both times he'd caught it before it fully came off, heart hammering, Director O's warning ringing in his ears, and his tip jar contained an amount of cash that made him briefly, genuinely dizzy. 2 men in particular had tipped like they were trying to win something. One had folded his bills with corner-perfect precision, like he'd ironed them first. The other had simply peeled off a stack and set it down with a wink so devastating Jai-woo nearly missed a step on the pole. You've got 2 regulars already, said Yuri, one of the other dancers backstage, counting her own tips with the efficiency of a woman who'd been doing this for years. The stiff one and the flirty one, booth 4. They come back, you're set for the semester. I don't need a semester, Jai-woo said, peeling off his mask the second the door closed, sweat-damp hair sticking to his forehead. I need exactly 400,000 won and a nap. Sure, honey, Yuri said, in the tone of someone who had said that exact sentence to herself many times and been catastrophically wrong every time. Jai-woo counted his cash 3 times on the subway home, grinning like an idiot, already mentally drafting the world's most dignified text to his landlord. Jai-woo, 1:47 a.m. Rent is paid. I hope you're happy. I hope you think about what you did. Landlord, 1:48 a.m. Finally. Also stop being dramatic. He fell asleep that night feeling, for the first time in months, like the universe had finally cut him a break. He had once again no idea how wrong he was. Chapter 5. Monday morning, Déjà Wuhan Jai-woo's part-time internship. The legitimate daylight one, the one his mother knew about, was at Kang Group's marketing department, 3 days a week, mostly making coffee and pretending to understand quarterly reports. He had never once, in 4 months of internship, actually met the CEO. Which was why, when he walked into the executive floor Monday morning to drop off signed paperwork, and nearly collided with a tall, sharp-jawed man in an impeccable suit who smelled distractingly familiar in a way Jai-woo couldn't place. He simply apologized and kept walking, entirely unaware that the man had frozen mid-step, nostrils flaring, brain short-circuiting. That sent Tae-min thought, staring after the retreating intern with a kind of dawning, horrified fascination. Why do I know that scent? He did not, in that moment, connect it to a masked dancer under club lighting. He simply filed it away under deeply unsettling Monday occurrences, and went to his 9 a.m. meeting slightly more distracted than usual. 2 floors down, in the design department where he was consulting, which mostly meant charming interns into doing his paperwork. Seo Ji-hoon had a nearly identical experience in the break room, catching a whiff of something achingly familiar off a college kid pouring coffee, and spent the following 20 minutes staring at the kid's back so intensely that the intern, alarmed, asked if he had food on his face. "No," Ji-hoon said slowly. "No, have we met?" "I'm the marketing intern," Jai-woo said, blinking. "Han Jai-woo, you're Director Seo's son, right? The consultant guy?" "That's me," Ji-hoon said, still squinting like he was trying to solve a very expensive puzzle. "You smell familiar." Jai-woo, who had absolutely nothing to hide because he was 90% sure this rich hotel-air weirdo could not possibly connect an intern to a masked pole dancer, simply raised an unbothered eyebrow. "I use the free shampoo in the campus gym. Maybe that's it." Ji-hoon watched him walk away, deeply unconvinced and deeply, dangerously intrigued. Chapter 6. The corporate meltdown it took precisely 1 week for Kang Tae-min and Seo Ji-hoon to become, without any formal agreement, professional rivals for the affections of a masked stranger. They had each seen exactly once. "I've had someone look into ownership records for Eclipse," Tae-min announced during what was supposed to be a routine budget meeting, causing 3 department heads to exchange deeply confused glances. "You had someone investigate the club," Ji-hoon said, delighted, leaning back in his chair. "That's insane. That's unhinged behavior. I love it. I wanted to know their tipping policy for repeat customers. It's called due diligence. You wanted an excuse to go back. I don't need an excuse. I'm a grown man with disposable income." "You are a man who has never once used the phrase disposable income unironically until you met a dancer in a fox mask," Ji-hoon said. "This is genuinely the most human I've ever seen you. Should I be concerned? Should HR be concerned?" "HR," Tae-min said with the particular dignity of a man losing an argument, "has no jurisdiction over my personal time." "Fine. Then let's go back Friday, both of us, and may the better tipper win." This isn't a competition, Ji-hoon." "Everything is a competition, Tae-min. I thought you, of all people, understood that." Tae-min opened his mouth to argue, closed it, and then, after a full 10 seconds of visible internal war, said quietly, "Friday works for me." Down the hall, entirely unaware that his 2 workplace acquaintances were plotting an unofficial romantic rivalry field trip to see him half-naked on a stage, Jai-woo was explaining to Mina over a lunch of extremely sad convenience store gimbap why he was, in fact, thriving. "2 guys tipped me an obscene amount and I don't even know their names," he said, practically glowing. "This is the best decision I've ever made. You said the same thing about buying that jacket. The jacket was also a great decision. I regret nothing. You regretted the jacket the next month when you couldn't afford groceries." "I said nothing, Mina." Chapter 7. Close Calls Friday arrived with the specific doom-laced energy of a plot twist that hasn't happened yet but is very obviously coming. Jai-woo, blissfully unaware, was backstage adjusting his mask and doing vocal warm-ups that were entirely unnecessary for a job that required 0 vocals, purely out of nervous habit. Out front, Tae-min and Ji-hoon had, without discussing it, both worn their most expensive cologne, both requested the same booth, and both spent the first 10 minutes of the evening pretending not to notice the other doing exactly the same thing. "You wore the black suit," Ji-hoon observed. "You wore an entire bottle of cologne. It's called effort, Tae-min. Some of us make an effort." "I make plenty of effort. I simply don't drown people in it." The lights dropped. The music started, and Fox climbed the pole with the exact same devastating, unbothered elegance as before, and both men went, once again, completely and helplessly silent. It was midway through the second song, a slower, moodier track, all low bass and dramatic lighting, that disaster very nearly struck. Jai-woo, mid-spin, felt one of the mask's side clips catch on a loose thread from his glove and shift, just slightly, just enough that for one horrifying half-second the bottom edge lifted from his jaw. His heart stopped. He fixed it in less than a second, smooth as silk, playing it off as part of the choreography, a hand brushing his own face, sultry and deliberate, and the crowd, none the wiser, cheered louder. But in booth 4, two alphas with abnormally good eyesight and an abnormally personal stake in the mask staying on had both gone rigid. "Did you see that?" Tae-min said quietly. "I saw that," Ji-hoon said. "For a second I thought, don't," Ji-hoon said. "Don't finish that sentence. I need another drink before I let myself think that thought." Because for one single, vertiginous half-second, underneath the studio lighting and the tilted mask, both of them had caught the edge of a jaw that looked, impossibly, absurdly, unbelievably, like it belonged to a marketing intern they'd each separately been thinking about far too much this week. Neither said anything else for the rest of the night. Both tipped an amount that would have made Director O weep with joy if she'd been counting. And both left Eclipse with the exact same unspoken, horrified, thrilling suspicion sitting like a hot coal in their chests. Chapter 8, The Bet We Need to Talk, Ji-hoon said, cornering Tae-min in the executive elevator Monday morning with the grim determination of a man about to discuss something deeply undignified. About the Q3 projections? About the intern Tae-min? Tae-min's entire body went very still. What about him? You noticed, Friday, the mask. I noticed nothing. You went so pale I thought you were having a cardiac event. Don't lie to me, we're in this together now, whether you like it or not. Tae-min exhaled slowly, the way he did before signing off on a merger he wasn't sure about. It's a coincidence. It's an absurd, statistically improbable coincidence, and I refuse to act on a hunch based on a half-second of poor lighting. Fine, Ji-hoon said. Then let's test it. Test it how? We invite him, both of us. To dinner, casual, work thing, whatever excuse you want. And we watch how he reacts to certain, specific things, songs, phrases. That thing Fox does with his eyebrow. You want to interrogate an intern using pole dancing eyebrow behavior as evidence. I want, Ji-hoon said, with the wounded dignity of a man who knew exactly how insane he sounded, to solve this mystery before I lose my mind. And also, if I'm being honest, I'd like to see him again regardless of which version of him shows up. Tae-min was quiet for a long moment. Fine, he said finally. Dinner, Thursday. But if you're wrong, you're paying for it, and you're never speaking of this again. And if I'm right, then, Tae-min said, staring at the elevator numbers ticking upward like they held the answer to a very complicated equation, we have a considerably bigger problem. Chapter 9. Dinner and Disaster. Ji-woo had exactly one thought when both the CEO and the weird hotelier consultant separately, then simultaneously, invited him to a casual work dinner, free food. He had no other thoughts. He would come to regret this lack of critical thinking almost immediately. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices, which should have been Ji-woo's first warning. The second warning was that both men kept staring at him with an intensity that felt less like polite professional interest, and more like two cats watching a very suspicious laser pointer. So, Ji-hoon said entirely too casually, "Do you dance, Ji-woo?" Ji-woo choked very slightly on his water. "Excuse me? Dance like hobbies. Do you have any?" Ji-woo's brain, running on instant noodles and adrenaline, produced the single worst possible answer available to him. "No, I'm extremely bad at dancing. 2 left feet. Tragic, really?" Under the table, Tae-min's phone buzzed with a single text from Ji-hoon. "He's lying, look at his face." Tae-min, without looking down, texted back, agreed, proceed with phase 2. "Interesting," Ji-hoon said aloud, smiling in a way that made every instinct in Ji-woo's Omega brain scream incoming. "Because I recently discovered this club, Eclipse. Do you know it?" Ji-woo's soul briefly left his body. "No," he said in the exact tone of someone who very much did know it. "Never heard of it, sounds fun though." "Clubby, they have this dancer," Tae-min said, entering the conversation with the surgical precision of a man closing a hostile takeover. "Goes by Fox, silver hair, wears a mask. Moves like," he paused, visibly searching for a professional way to describe it and failing, "like he's daring the room to survive him." Ji-woo, internally screaming, externally the picture of casual disinterest, took an extremely long sip of water. "Sounds like a great time. You should come with us sometime," Ji-hoon said. "As a group, very professional, very platonic." "I have class," Ji-woo said immediately. "At midnight? I have a very demanding sleep schedule." There was a pause, a very long, very pointed pause, during which both alphas exchanged a look that Ji-woo did not miss and did not enjoy. "Well," Tae-min said finally, mercifully changing the subject to quarterly earnings of all things, "another time then." Jai-woo went home that night, collapsed face first onto his bed, and informed Mina through muffled pillow speech that he was, quote, going to actually die, and that his two rich alpha admirers from the club were apparently also his workplace superiors, and that he had never once, in the entire history of bad decisions, made a worse one than accepting free dinner. This is the best thing that has ever happened to me, Mina said, already texting 3 other friends. Mina, I need popcorn for this. Chapter 10. Mask Slip. Jai-woo made a decision that night, staring at his ceiling with the clarity of a man who had run every possible scenario and found all of them terrifying. He would simply stop dancing at Eclipse until things cooled down. Quietly, quit without drama. No confrontation, no reveal, no scandal. Simple, dignified, mature. He lasted 4 days before his bank account reminded him that dignity didn't pay tuition. One more week, he told Director O on Friday, mask in hand, steeling himself. Just to cover the rest of the semester, and then I'm done. Sure, honey, Director O said, in the exact tone Yuri always used, and Jai-woo chose, fatally, to ignore the omen. That night, of course, both alphas were in the audience again. Because of course they were, because the universe had clearly decided Jai-woo's life was a comedy, and it was time for the season finale. Midway through his set, during a particularly athletic transition Jai-woo had absolutely not rehearsed enough, his ankle rolled on the platform edge. Nothing serious, a stumble, a graceless half-second, but enough that his hand shot out on instinct to catch himself against the pole, and the mask, secured by nothing more than a thin elastic band and pure hope, went flying directly into the front row, directly into Seo Ji-hoon's lap. The music didn't stop, the lights didn't stop, but every single thought in 3 people's heads absolutely screeched to a halt. Jai-woo froze mid-crouch, bare-faced under stage lighting, silver hair sticking to his flushed cheeks, staring directly into the horrified, delighted, thunderstruck faces of his internship's CEO and the CEO's extremely attractive workplace rival, both of whom were staring back at him like they'd just watched the last piece of a puzzle click violently into place. Hi, Jai-woo said, into a microphone that was, thankfully, not turned on, so only the front row heard it. Ji-hoon, mask still sitting in his lap like a live grenade, looked at Tae-min. I win the bet, he said faintly. Shut up, Tae-min said, staring at Jai-woo with an expression that was somehow both utterly professional and completely unraveled at the same time. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Backstage security, mercifully, chose that exact moment to hustle Jai-woo off stage before the rest of the crowd could register what had happened, leaving both alphas sitting in stunned silence, one mask, and a considerably more complicated Monday morning ahead of them. Chapter 11, the reveal, formally. I can explain, Jai-woo said. 20 minutes later, sitting backstage in his regular clothes, mask clutched to his chest like a shield, facing down 2 men who had cornered him at the staff exit with the focused urgency of a hostage negotiation. Please do, Tae-min said, arms crossed, jaw doing that tight thing it did before he fired someone or apparently before he had feelings. I needed money, rent, suppressants. The scholarship application required an essay about my feelings, and I would rather juggle knives than write that essay, so I got a job, and the job happened to be this. And you two happen to be also this. And I panicked because you're both my internship supervisors, technically, sort of, and that felt like a legally complicated crush to have, so I decided the smartest move was to say nothing and hope the universe sorted it out. The universe, Ji-hoon repeated, did not sort it out. The universe threw your mask into my lap. I'm aware I was there. Why didn't you just tell us? Tae-min said, and something in his voice had gone quieter, less CEO, more actually a little wounded, which Jai-woo had not prepared for. Because, Jai-woo said, and here, finally, the sarcasm cracked just slightly, revealing something rower underneath. You're both rich and important and terrifying, and I'm a broke intern who dances on a pole to afford instant noodles, and there is not a version of that reveal that doesn't sound like a joke. Hi, I'm the person you've been throwing money at every Friday. Also, I make your coffee. Also, please don't fire me. Silence. I'm not going to fire you, Tae-min said, sounding almost offended by the suggestion. I was never going to fire you either, Ji-hoon added. I don't even technically have firing authority. I'm a consultant. My job is largely decorative. Then what? Jai-woo said, voice smaller than he meant it to be. Do you want? The 2 alphas looked at each other. A long, loaded, deeply unspoken conversation passed between them. The kind that only happens between 2 men who have spent a week competing over the same person, and have just now realized the competition might genuinely have to become a negotiation. Dinner, Ji-hoon said finally, a real one, where you don't lie about your hobbies. And, Tae-min added, with the visible discomfort of a man saying something honest out loud for possibly the first time in his adult life. An explanation of what exactly we are both meant to do about the fact that we've apparently both fallen for the same extremely stubborn Omega, because I refuse to lose this to him. A pointed glance at Ji-hoon. Excuse me, Luz. This isn't a hostile takeover, Tae-min. Everything is a hostile takeover if you frame it correctly. Ji-woo, watching two of the richest, most powerful men in the room bicker like teenagers over him, felt something in his chest, something warm and terrified, and cautiously, dangerously hopeful, settle into place. I have a lot of student debt, he said, and a very demanding class schedule, and a roommate who will absolutely never let either of you live this down. Noted, Tae-min said. Irrelevant, Ji-hoon said at the exact same time. Fine, Ji-woo said, and for the first time since the mask had gone flying, he let himself smile. One dinner. But I'm ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, and neither of you gets to complain about it. Chapter 12. The club under threat dinner against every prior omen in this story went well, alarmingly well. Well enough that one dinner quietly became a weekly occurrence, then a twice-weekly occurrence, then an arrangement so thoroughly established that Mina began referring to Ji-woo's love life as the merger, and refused to elaborate further. It might have stayed simple, messy, absurd, occasionally competitive, but simple, if not for the small matter of a rival club owner named Director Beak, who had spent the last 2 months trying to buy out Eclipse's lease out from under Director O, and was, upon discovering that two extremely wealthy, extremely influential alphas had taken a sudden interest in one of her dancers, delighted to have found new leverage. Sell me the building, Beak said to Director O, smiling with all the warmth of a shark. Or I'll make sure certain investors hear about your masked dancers' extracurriculars. I imagine a certain CEO wouldn't want photos of his little Omega performing for cash circulating during shareholder season. Director O, who had survived worse men than Beak, told him exactly where he could put his offer, but the threat reached Ji-woo anyway, second-hand, through a nervous Yuri backstage. He's not bluffing, Yuri said. He's already got a photographer sniffing around the alley exit. Ji-woo's stomach dropped somewhere around his shoes. It was one thing to risk his own reputation. He'd made peace with that the day he took the job. It was another thing entirely to imagine dragging Tae-min's company or Ji-hoon's family name into a tabloid scandal because of him. He did the only thing his brain, running on panic and pride, could think to do. He told them both immediately, bluntly, and braced for the worst. So fire me from whatever this is, he said, arms crossed, chin up, before it costs either of you anything. I mean it. I can handle a scandal. I can't handle being the reason you lose shareholders. There was a beat of silence. Then Tae-min very calmly took out his phone. What's this man's name? Tae-min? I didn't build a company by letting people threaten what's mine, he said, already dialing his legal team, voice gone flat and dangerous in a way Ji-woo had genuinely never heard from him before. Director Beak is about to discover exactly how thoroughly Kang Group can make his life difficult. And, Ji-hoon added, cracking his knuckles with a grin that was significantly less charming and significantly more feral than usual. My family owns the building next to his second club. I imagine there are some very inconvenient zoning issues we could suddenly rediscover interest in. You're both insane, Ji-woo said, torn somewhere between horror and a helpless, overwhelmed sort of affection. We're thorough, Tae-min corrected. There's a difference. You don't have to do this for me. We're not doing it for you, Ji-hoon said, softer now, reaching out to tuck a strand of silver hair behind Ji-woo's ear with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the murder he'd just casually threatened. We're doing it because nobody gets to make you disappear just to protect us. That's not how this works. Not anymore. Ji-woo, who had spent an entire semester assuming he'd have to handle every disaster alone, found himself, for possibly the first time in his adult life, entirely speechless. Director Beak's threats, unsurprisingly, evaporated within the week under the combined weight of two furious, extremely well-resourced alphas. He sold his failing second club at a loss and was never mentioned again, which was, everyone agreed, exactly what he deserved. Chapter 13. What fox leaves behind Ji-woo danced at Eclipse for 3 more weeks after that, not out of necessity anymore, but because Director O begged, and because, if he was honest with himself, he'd miss it. The lights, the music, the particular thrill of being someone bold and untouchable for a few hours a night. His last performance was, unofficially, sold out. Yuri had apparently let it slip to half the regulars, and the club was packed with a crowd that had no idea they were watching a farewell. Two people in the front booth knew, though. They'd known for weeks, and had spent an embarrassing amount of money reserving that same booth for the occasion. Ji-woo climbed the pole one last time, mask secure, silver hair catching the light, and thought, not about rent, for once, not about suppressants or tuition or essays about his feelings, but about the two idiots in the front row who had somehow, against every possible sane instinct, become the two most important people in his life. When the final note faded and the applause rose, he did something he'd never once done in 6 months of dancing. He walked to the edge of the stage, knelt down in front of booth 4, and in full view of a room full of strangers, lifted the mask off his own face. The crowd gasped. Yuri, backstage, screamed loud enough to be heard over the sound system. Director Oh, watching from the bar, simply smiled like a woman who had known exactly how this story would end from the very first audition. "I quit," Ji-woo announced into the microphone, breathless, grinning, silver hair a mess, looking directly at two stunned, thunderstruck alphas who had followed him into every ridiculous corner of this story. "Effective immediately. Also, I'm taking both of you home tonight, and neither of you gets a say in the matter." "We weren't going to argue," Ji-hoon said, already standing, already laughing, already reaching for him. "We really weren't," Tae-min agreed, and for once, for the first time in the entire story, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had simply, hopelessly, thoroughly lost. Epilogue. 6 months later, Han Ji-woo graduated with a business degree. A scholarship he'd earned on merit rather than a hardship essay he still refused to write. And two ridiculous, wildly competitive, deeply devoted alphas who had somehow, against all odds and considerable HR concerns, worked out an arrangement that made all three of them absurdly happy. Kang Group's official internship policy, as of that year, quietly added a clause prohibiting supervisors from dating interns. A clause that came entirely too late to apply retroactively, much to the eternal amusement of the entire marketing department, who had all, it turned out, known exactly what was going on for months and simply hadn't said anything out of professional courtesy. Mina got free lifetime hotel stays out of the whole ordeal and considered it, generously, fair compensation for emotional damages. And somewhere, in a drawer in Ji-woo's apartment, a black fox mask sat carefully preserved, not because he needed the money anymore, but because some things, he decided, were worth keeping just for the story. The end.